Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today I want to talk about what we often overlook in well-known characters like the heroes of Harry Potter. Despite all their nobility, there are moments when their actions raise questions. Let's break down some examples where good characters acted less than heroically. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Attitude towards house. Elves. One glaring example of how characters we consider good actually display their disregard is their treatment of house elves. In the Goblet of Fire, Hermione creates an organization to improve the living conditions of enslaved house elves. Despite this, her friends, Harry, Ron, and others, show no interest in the issue. They dismiss her idea, not realizing that matters like the treatment of house elves are crucial in the fight against the ideas of supremacy preached by Voldemort. Number 2. Cedric's indifference. Cedric Diggory, who seemed like the perfect ally to Harry in the Goblet of Fire, was far from flawless. Despite his courage and nobility, he did not intervene when Harry was mocked by other students. Throughout the first few months of the 4th year, Harry endured bullying, and Cedric, being older, could have at least tried to help. Instead, he chose to stay out of it, leaving Harry to face the hardships alone. Number 3. Lupin's decision. Lupin was always one of the most respected characters, but his decision in the final book to suggest that Harry, Ron, and Hermione join in the search for Dumbledore is puzzling. Lupin was willing to abandon his wife and newborn child to continue a dangerous mission. Harry rightly condemned him for this, but the mere fact of such behavior remains questionable. Number 4. Slughorn and his club. Horace Slughorn, who seemed like one of the best professors at Hogwarts, turns out to be a much more controversial figure. His teaching methods were often linked to favoritism and personal gain. Slughorn created a club for students he deemed special, but in reality it was just a way to form his own personal team of useful people. His actions contradicted the ideals he portrayed as a teacher. Number 5. Molly Weasley and belief in gossip. Molly Weasley, undoubtedly a loving and caring mother, sometimes exhibits weaknesses that undermine her image. For example, she believed Rita Skeeter's gossip about Harry and Hermione and even sent the girl a small Easter egg as a gift. This ridiculous and unfounded behavior undermines Molly's reputation as a kind and caring woman. Number 6. Fred and George's antics. Fred and George, always cheerful and mischievous, often took their pranks too far. They scared Ron, shoved Montague into the vanishing cabinet, and tested their products on younger students. If they had been in Slytherin, their actions would have been perceived much differently, but since they were in Gryffindor, their jokes were often forgiven. However, this doesn't change the fact that their behavior could have earned more criticism. Number 7. Harry's life with the Dursleys. Harry's life with the Dursleys was full of cruelty and neglect. He faced terrible treatment from his relatives, and in the worst cases, he wasn't even fed. But what's astonishing is that the adults, including Dumbledore and McGonagall, never took any steps to ease his situation. Did they really not know what was going on? This raises questions about how much they truly cared about him. Number 8. Neville and his dangerous mistakes. Neville Longbottom is undeniably one of the most beloved characters in the Harry Potter series, known for his bravery and growth into a true hero. However, his clumsiness and absent-mindedness often put others in danger. One such instance occurs in The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Neville, in a moment of carelessness, writes down the Gryffindor Tower passwords on a piece of paper and then loses it. This seemingly minor mistake leads to a serious breach of security. Sirius Black, who is thought to be a dangerous fugitive, uses this opportunity to infiltrate Gryffindor Tower. If Sirius had been a criminal intent on causing harm, this slip-up could have had tragic consequences. "I was so stupid," Neville admits, realizing the gravity of his mistake. While Neville's bravery later becomes legendary, his earlier blunders serve as a reminder of the dangers that can arise from small, careless actions. In this case, his innocent mistake nearly led to a direct threat to the student's safety. Although his intentions are always good and his heart is in the right place, Neville's scatterbrained nature sometimes makes him a liability to those around him. This incident highlights the fact that even the most well-meaning and courageous characters can make mistakes that put others at risk. Number 9. Hagrid's reckless teaching. Rubeus Hagrid, the kind-hearted half-giant, is beloved by all fans of Harry Potter, known for his loyalty and warmth. However, as a teacher, his approach often left much to be desired. On his very first lesson in care of magical creatures, he introduced a hippogriff named Buckbeak to the class. Despite Buckbeak's majestic appearance, Hagrid failed to warn his students about how to properly approach such a creature, leading to an altercation when Draco Malfoy insulted it. The hippogriff, in turn, attacked Draco, nearly injuring him. "I'll have no backtalk from you, Malfoy," Hagrid said, seemingly oblivious to the potential danger he had put the students in. Yes, Malfoy was rude, but Hagrid, as the instructor, should have anticipated the risk and taken better precautions. This was not an isolated incident. Hagrid's reckless disregard for safety continued when he brought his giant brother Grawp into the Forbidden Forest, an act that directly endangered his students. "You've got to understand, Harry, he's not as bad as he seems," Hagrid explained, but bringing such a massive, unpredictable creature so close to students was both irresponsible and reckless. Grawp's presence in the forest led to a series of dangerous encounters that could have easily resulted in injury or worse. Though Hagrid's heart was in the right place, his lack of foresight and disregard for student safety often put those under his care in peril. His actions raise questions about his ability to truly protect the students he so dearly loved. Number 10. James Potter's bullying of Snape. James Potter is remembered as a brave and noble hero, someone who was instrumental in the fight against Voldemort. Yet his school years present a more troubling picture. Severus Snape's memories reveal a different side to James, a cruel and arrogant bully who seemed to take pleasure in tormenting Snape. One particularly damning moment occurs when James humiliates Snape in front of the entire school, mocking him without provocation. "I don't want to show off, Snivellus, but I'm a much better wizard than you'll ever be," James taunts with his friends, including Sirius, laughing along. This wasn't just a one-time incident. James regularly used his popularity and position to belittle Snape, turning the school's attention to the hapless Slytherin. Snape, of course, was no saint, and his own actions were often far from noble. However, the sheer cruelty of James's behavior, especially in the presence of his friends, raises questions. How could a hero like James Potter, a man who would later become a key figure in the fight against evil, treat someone so horribly? "He was always there to make sure I knew exactly how worthless I was," Snape confesses, revealing the deep emotional scars left by James's bullying. It is clear that James's actions were not simply the result of youthful mischief. They were rooted in a desire to assert dominance and publicly shame Snape, despite there being no real cause. The most disturbing part of this dynamic is the support James receives from his friends. Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew, who would later stand by him in battles against dark forces, are complicit in James's cruelty. They don't just stand by, they encourage it. This raises the question of why this behavior is often overlooked by fans of the series. James's bullying is framed as part of his youthful arrogance, but it is difficult to ignore how much of it was rooted in a need to assert power over someone he saw as inferior. For all his courage in the face of darkness, James's treatment of Snape exposes a darker side of his character, one that's not as easily forgiven as his later heroics. Number 11. Ron's jealousy toward Harry. Ron Weasley is often seen as the loyal friend, the brave fighter, and the optimistic hero. But beneath that surface there lies a darker side, one marked by jealousy and insecurity. A prime example of this is during the Goblet of Fire, when Ron becomes consumed with jealousy over Harry's unexpected participation in the Triwizard Tournament. He doesn't even attempt to understand how Harry's name came out of the goblet. Instead, he accuses Harry of seeking fame and glory. "You could have told me," Ron yells, hurt and betrayed. His immediate distrust and his refusal to listen to Harry's side of the story show a deep, almost uncharacteristic jealousy that lingers throughout the book. This jealousy isn't just a one-time occurrence. In fact, Ron's feelings of envy continue to surface in several key moments throughout the series. Whether it's Harry's relationship with Hermione or his natural talent that often puts him in the spotlight, Ron's insecurities bubble up, clouding his judgment and sometimes his friendship. When Harry and Hermione become closer, Ron's jealousy escalates, and he begins to withdraw, not realizing that his behavior is harming their friendship. "I'm not a Weasley anymore, am I?" Ron mutters, his words tinged with bitterness, as he distances himself from the two people who've always been his closest friends. What's troubling is that Ron doesn't always address his jealousy directly or maturely. Instead, he lets it fester and create unnecessary tension in his relationships. He often lets his insecurities take over, choosing to blame others rather than confronting his own feelings. It's in these moments that Ron's flaws, his insecurities, his doubts, his jealousy, become painfully clear. He's not the perfect, loyal friend we often see him as, but rather a character who is deeply human with all the flaws that come with it. Despite these flaws, however, Ron ultimately redeems himself. As the series progresses, he learns to confront his feelings of jealousy, maturing and growing into a more understanding and supportive friend. In the Deathly Hallows, after leaving Harry and Hermione due to his anger and jealousy, Ron returns determined to fight alongside them. "I'm not going to let you face Voldemort alone," he says, having finally overcome his insecurities. Ron's growth is a testament to the complexity of his character. He's not just the sidekick, but a flawed, real person learning to rise above his weaknesses. Number 12. Hermione's manipulations. Hermione Granger, often seen as the moral compass of the Harry Potter series, is known for her intelligence and sense of justice. Yet beneath her righteous exterior, she has resorted to manipulation and even cruelty to achieve her goals. One of the most glaring examples of this is when she uses a spell to punish the traitor Cormac McLaggen during the battle at the Department of Mysteries. The curse she casts causes him to break out in painful boils, a clear overstep of her usual moral boundaries. Hermione, who always prided herself on being the voice of reason, could justify her actions by the war, but this moment reveals a darker side to her. "It's the only way to make sure he doesn't ruin everything," she says. Yet the cruelty in her words lingers, making us question her methods. Moreover, Hermione's manipulation of others often went beyond just her enemies. During the final book, The Deathly Hallows, she makes the decision to erase her parents' memories and send them away to Australia for their safety. Though she had good intentions, protecting them from the dangers of the war, her actions were still a significant breach of their autonomy. "They won't remember me," she says tearfully, "but the weight of the decision is immense." Was it right for Hermione, even with the best of intentions, to make such a life-altering decision for her parents without their consent? Her actions raise an ethical question. How far is too far when it comes to protecting those we love? Hermione's actions were driven by her love for her parents and her desire to protect them, yet she chose to take away their memories forever. While it may have been the safest choice, it's hard to ignore the fact that Hermione made that decision for them without their approval. "I don't know if they'll ever forgive me," she admits, hinting at the emotional toll her choice has on her as well. In doing so, she becomes the ultimate arbiter of what is best for her loved ones, leaving us to question whether anyone, even a well-meaning friend, has the right to make such decisions for another person. In the end, Hermione's manipulations, though motivated by love and a desire for justice, reveal a deeper, more complex layer to her character. While she may be the brains of the trio, her willingness to bend her moral code for the greater good makes us reconsider whether her methods were as pure as her intentions. For every act of bravery, there was an underlying act of control that we cannot simply overlook. Hermione, the ever-loyal friend, was also capable of using manipulation as a tool in her fight for what she believed was right. Number 13, Dumbledore's manipulation of Harry. Albus Dumbledore, the wise and revered headmaster of Hogwarts, has always been portrayed as the ultimate mentor. Yet behind the calm demeanor and loving guidance, there lies a darker side to his character. Dumbledore never fully revealed the truth to Harry about the crucial role he was destined to play in the battle against Voldemort. For years, Dumbledore allowed Harry to risk his life, knowing that the boy would eventually have to die in order to defeat the Dark Lord. "Harry, you must die," Dumbledore quietly confessed to him near the end of the series, a chilling moment that showed just how far Dumbledore had gone to orchestrate the downfall of Voldemort. Throughout the years, Dumbledore manipulated Harry, using him as a pawn in a larger game. Harry, unaware of his true fate, was thrust into life-threatening situations repeatedly, from the Triwizard Tournament to the hunt for Horcruxes. Each year, Dumbledore sent Harry on perilous missions, never fully explaining the risks or the purpose behind them. "You must be the one to find them, Harry," Dumbledore said, knowing all the while that Harry's survival was not guaranteed. And yet, he withheld this knowledge from him. Dumbledore's actions were calculated, designed to guide Harry toward a final, inevitable sacrifice. Even after Dumbledore's death, his manipulation continued, as he had left behind instructions for Harry to complete the mission he had started. Dumbledore had created a legacy of secrecy, using the prophecy and Harry's connection to Voldemort to push him closer to the moment of his death. "You were the one who had to do it, Harry," Dumbledore's portrait would later confirm, as if his manipulations were all part of a carefully crafted plan. Harry, once again, was left to navigate the consequences of Dumbledore's hidden truth. This raises serious questions about Dumbledore's true character. Was he the selfless mentor we thought he was, or was he just another strategist in the war against Voldemort, willing to sacrifice the one person who trusted him most? Dumbledore's complex approach to Harry's fate makes it clear that even the most revered characters in the series can have a dark side, driven by the harsh realities of war and the pursuit of victory at any cost. Number 14. Sirius Black's treatment of Kreacher. Sirius Black, undoubtedly one of the most beloved characters, has a dark side that many tend to overlook. His treatment of the house elf Kreacher reveals this shadowy aspect of his character. Sirius despised Kreacher, seeing him as nothing more than a tool to be used and abused. He showed no kindness toward the creature, constantly belittling him. Kreacher, for all his faults, was a product of the environment in which he was raised, an environment where cruelty and disrespect were the norm. It's clear that Sirius's harshness played a large role in shaping Kreacher's actions. At one point, Sirius even goes so far as to refer to Kreacher as that filthy little traitor. This harsh label comes after Kreacher reveals a deep secret about the Black family. Instead of understanding Kreacher's loyalty to his old master, Sirius treats him with disdain, further deepening the rift between them. "You're just a filthy old elf," Sirius spits at him, showing no remorse for his words. His attitude, coupled with Kreacher's inherent nature, ignites a dangerous combination. This relationship takes a tragic turn later when Kreacher betrays Sirius by helping Bellatrix Lestrange and Narcissa Malfoy. But what is perhaps more striking is that Kreacher's betrayal is born not from evil, but from years of mistreatment. Kreacher, though a creature of habit, was loyal to the Black family's legacy, yet he could not forget the hatred he received from Sirius. Perhaps if Sirius had treated him with even a fraction of kindness, Kreacher's loyalty would have remained intact. In the end, Kreacher's actions led to a devastating blow to Sirius. The House Elf's betrayal played a key part in the tragic loss of Sirius's life. As he fell through the veil in the Department of Mysteries, one might wonder if the events that led to his death could have unfolded differently if he had shown Kreacher the respect he deserved. But Sirius's inability to see beyond his own bitterness cost him dearly. Number 15, McGonagall's bias against other houses. Minerva McGonagall, a character who embodies the very essence of stern fairness, is admired by fans for her wisdom, dedication, and unyielding sense of justice. As the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and the head of Gryffindor House, she represents the ideal of fairness, or so it seems. But upon closer inspection, there are moments when her actions suggest a troubling inconsistency, one that raises questions about her true commitment to the fairness she preaches. Specifically, McGonagall's treatment of her students, particularly those of other houses, reveals a bias that goes unnoticed by many. Her behavior, though often overlooked by the broader Hogwarts community, showcases a glaring flaw in her role as a teacher and disciplinarian. One example of McGonagall's partiality is seen through her handling of the infamous trio Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley, who often flout the school's rules with little consequence. Over the course of the series, we witness how McGonagall, despite being a strict teacher, regularly overlooks the misdeeds of these three Gryffindors. It is especially notable in cases where their behavior would, in most circumstances, warrant severe punishment. McGonagall's favoritism becomes apparent as she chooses to turn a blind eye to their rule-breaking and even makes allowances for their actions. These decisions are particularly problematic because McGonagall is a figure of authority who, more than anyone, should strive to instill a sense of equality and justice among the students. Take, for example, the events surrounding the first task of the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Harry, a fourth-year student, is entered into the tournament despite not putting his name in the Goblet of Fire. McGonagall, as the head of Gryffindor, is well aware of the dangers this poses, yet, instead of addressing the possible unfairness or the blatant disregard for the rules that brought Harry into the competition, she bends the rules to support him. She intervenes on his behalf when it becomes clear that Harry is struggling with the task. Rather than upholding the rules of the tournament, she does what she can to give him a competitive edge, all while maintaining her image of fairness to the public eye. This favoritism goes unpunished, even when the other students, like Cedric Diggory, follow the rules and face far more scrutiny. McGonagall's partiality is even more evident when considering how she treats students from other houses, particularly Slytherins. The rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin is well known, and McGonagall, who represents Gryffindor House, seems to harbour a particular disdain for Slytherin students. One glaring instance of this bias occurs during the events of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Draco Malfoy, a Slytherin student, challenges Harry to a duel. Despite being one of the most senior professors at Hogwarts, McGonagall's response is far from neutral. Instead of acting as a figure of authority to mediate or resolve the situation in an objective way, she simply allows the antagonistic rivalry to continue, further cementing the idea that Gryffindor students, whom she favours, are free to behave as they wish, while Slytherins are punished for the same actions. Moreover, McGonagall's favoritism is evident in the way she treats Slytherin students during the Quidditch matches. When Harry's Gryffindor team faces off against Slytherin, McGonagall's enthusiasm and support for her team are undeniable. While every professor is supposed to remain impartial, McGonagall's actions reveal her underlying bias. She is far more lenient when it comes to Harry and his friends, even when they make significant mistakes or break the rules. For example, in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron crash the flying car into the Whomping Willow, McGonagall's reaction is less about discipline and more about the consequences of the situation. She scolds them but does not administer the level of punishment one might expect from a teacher in her position. Contrast this with her more stringent approach to Slytherins, such as in Harry Potter and The Prisoner of Azkaban, when she immediately reports Draco Malfoy's misdeeds without any room for leniency. The selective nature of McGonagall's discipline raises an important question about the concept of fairness in her role as an educator. The students at Hogwarts look up to her as a model of integrity, someone who is supposed to be impartial and just. Yet by consistently turning a blind eye to the actions of her favoured students, while punishing others for similar offences, McGonagall undermines the very values of equality and fairness that she preaches. Her bias goes unnoticed by many, partly because of her reputation and the trust students place in her. It is easy to overlook the inconsistencies of someone we respect and admire, especially when they are as revered as McGonagall. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, McGonagall's favoritism extends to the way she handles the members of Dumbledore's army. The students, led by Harry, are breaking school rules by secretly learning defense against the dark arts, but McGonagall, instead of reprimanding them, offers subtle encouragement. While it is true that she later tries to protect them from Umbridge's wrath, her reluctance to impose consequences for their secret meetings shows a clear preferential treatment. McGonagall's leniency towards Harry and his friends often blinds her to the unfair treatment other students might face in similar situations, particularly when the actions of students from other houses are considered. Number 16. Ginny Weasley's aggressive behaviour. Ginny Weasley is often regarded as the perfect match for Harry Potter, brave, independent, and attractive. From the very first time she appears in the Chamber of Secrets, it is clear that she possesses a fiery spirit and an innate sense of courage. Over time, she grows into a strong and determined young woman, and her relationship with Harry flourishes. However, beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, there are moments in the books where Ginny's behaviour raises questions. At times, she displays a surprising cruelty towards others, especially in her school years, actions that are frequently overlooked by fans, yet cannot be ignored when considering the complexities of her character. Ginny's moments of aggression and malice are not as frequent as her acts of bravery or kindness, but they are impactful nonetheless. The way she reacts in situations that could be seen as minor offences or rivalries reveals a darker side to her character. One of the most notable instances of her cruelty occurs during her years at Hogwarts, when she casts the Bat Bogey Hex on fellow student Zacharias Smith. In the Order of the Phoenix, Ginny uses this hex, in which causes the victim's bogies to become bat-like and swarm around them, on Zacharias, who had already earned the ire of many with his obnoxious and often rude behaviour. While it could be argued that Zacharias was unpleasant and deserved some form of retaliation, Ginny's reaction is far from a mere playful joke. The hex causes him physical discomfort, and while it's undoubtedly a creative bit of magic, it is also a sign of her growing anger and frustration. The book never dives deeply into her reasons for casting the hex, and there is no direct consequence to her actions. Yet, this incident paints a picture of someone who is willing to hurt another to prove a point or satisfy her own personal vendetta. What is even more troubling about Ginny's behaviour is that this act is just one in a series of similarly aggressive actions she takes throughout the books. Her use of magic as a weapon is not limited to Zacharias Smith. There is a clear pattern of her resorting to hexes and curses in situations where other students might have opted for less harmful ways to address a conflict. In a world where magic is frequently used for fun and games, Ginny's willingness to cast curses on classmates without much provocation stands out as an example of her darker impulses. The Harry Potter books often paint her as a strong character, but they also showcase moments where that strength is misguided and she channels it into cruelty rather than protection or justice. In The Half-Blood Prince, Ginny's tendency to use her magic for personal grievances surfaces again, this time during her relationship with Harry. The couple's interactions are often sweet, filled with mutual respect, but Ginny's behavior towards other students, especially boys who might show an interest in Harry, hints at a possessiveness that borders on toxic. She can be seen as having a quick temper when she perceives a threat to her relationship, which leads her to lash out at those around her. This is another instance of Ginny's darker side, which, although less obvious than her magical misdeeds, speaks to her insecurities and her need to dominate situations where she feels vulnerable. Even when Ginny is not directly causing harm, her presence in scenes of rivalry and discord tends to escalate matters. In The Order of the Phoenix, Ginny participates in a prank that humiliates Draco Malfoy during one of his encounters with Harry and Ron. While the prank itself is not particularly malicious and is in fact a moment of light-heartedness, it is Ginny's enthusiasm for the act that makes it stand out. She doesn't hesitate to join in the ridicule, and it is clear that she enjoys the power dynamic of the moment. This is a side of Ginny that we rarely see in the books, yet it is an important one to acknowledge, as it shows her capacity for cruelty when it suits her needs. Her ability to join in and escalate these acts hints at a deeper resentment she carries, perhaps stemming from her years of being overshadowed by her brothers or constantly being the little sister in the family. Ginny's actions also reflect a tendency to protect her own, even at the expense of others. Her loyalty to Harry, which is admirable in many ways, often leads her to disregard the feelings of other people. When she casts a spell on Zacharias Smith, she does so not just out of anger at his behavior, but also to defend her friends and those she cares about. While this instinct to protect is understandable, it is important to acknowledge the harm that can come from such actions. Her behavior suggests that her loyalty, while strong, can sometimes cloud her judgment, making her act without fully considering the consequences for others. Moreover, Ginny's treatment of those she deems inferior or undesirable is an area that often goes unnoticed. As a member of one of the most famous wizarding families in the books, Ginny often operates from a position of privilege. She rarely considers how her actions affect those who are not as well connected or respected in the wizarding world. This can be seen in how she treats characters like Zacharias Smith, who, despite his flaws, is still a fellow student at Hogwarts. Rather than trying to understand his perspective, Ginny resorts to hexing him, reinforcing a sense of entitlement that she doesn't seem to question. Number 17, Arthur Weasley's carelessness at work. Arthur Weasley, a beloved figure in the Harry Potter series, is often celebrated for his kind-hearted nature, his unyielding support of his family, and his loyalty to the Order of the Phoenix. He stands as a symbol of a caring father and a devoted husband. But beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, Arthur's actions within the Ministry of Magic raise significant questions about his professional ethics. In the magical world where integrity and lawfulness are highly valued, Arthur's behavior, particularly when it concerns his obsession with Muggle artifacts, presents a troubling contradiction. Arthur works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where he is assigned to the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. His job is clear: to protect magical society from the unregulated use of Muggle inventions. However, his personal interests seem to cloud his professional judgment. Arthur is fascinated by Muggle objects, often to the point of obsession, and this fascination blinds him to the very laws he is sworn to uphold. Over the years, he turns a blind eye to the many ways in which he himself breaks the law, seemingly without any remorse or concern for the potential consequences. One of the most glaring examples of Arthur's professional misconduct is his repeated tampering with Muggle devices. As a wizard employed to safeguard against such violations, he is in a position of power and responsibility. Yet he regularly modifies Muggle objects to suit his own curiosity. Arthur's fascination with Muggle technology is so deep that he becomes personally involved in altering Muggle items for his own amusement. He often brings home Muggle artifacts, regardless of the risks they might pose to the wizarding world. While this may seem harmless on the surface, Arthur's actions directly contradict the very laws that govern his department. A notable example of Arthur's disregard for his job's ethical boundaries is his obsession with Muggle flying cars. He owns a flying Ford Anglia, a car that he has enchanted to fly and perform magic. This car, while initially a clever way to transport his family, represents a significant violation of the rules Arthur is supposed to enforce. The car itself is an example of Arthur's irresponsible behavior. It is both a blatant misuse of Muggle technology and a violation of the Ministry's regulations on modifying Muggle objects. Not only does Arthur modify the car, but he also uses it recklessly, transporting his children to Hogwarts without considering the dangerous consequences of using such an object for illegal travel. Even when Arthur is questioned about his actions, there is little indication that he is aware of the severity of his transgressions. His casual attitude towards the law speaks volumes about his lack of respect for the boundaries between Muggle and magical worlds. The flying car incident, in which Harry and Ron use the vehicle to escape from the Dursleys' house, serves as a dramatic example of Arthur's negligence. He does not seem to recognize the implications of using such an object in a manner that violates numerous Ministry regulations. In fact, he seems to take great pleasure in the creation and use of such devices, showing a complete disregard for the rules he is paid to enforce. Arthur's tendency to prioritize his personal interest in Muggle objects over his professional duties is not limited to just the flying car. He is also known to tinker with a variety of Muggle gadgets, constantly experimenting with ways to modify them. While his intentions may appear innocent, driven by genuine curiosity, his actions are far from it. As an employee of the Ministry, he should be setting an example of responsibility and professionalism. Instead, he uses his position to indulge in his personal obsession with Muggle technology, and this, in turn, compromises his ability to fulfill his role with integrity. Despite these lapses in judgment, Arthur continues to receive admiration and trust from his family and colleagues. His caring nature, his humor, and his devotion to his family blind those around him to the reality of his misconduct. However, it is crucial to acknowledge that Arthur's actions, while seemingly harmless, are emblematic of a larger problem in the magical community. By excusing his behavior, his family and the Ministry fail to hold him accountable for his professional irresponsibility. The message here is clear. Personal interests, when left unchecked, can cloud even the most well-meaning individual's judgment. What makes Arthur's behavior even more troubling is his position within the Ministry. He is supposed to be a law enforcer, a protector of the magical community. However, his actions suggest a disregard for the very laws he is charged with upholding. There is a clear contradiction in the way Arthur behaves. As a father, he is the epitome of responsibility. Yet, as an employee of the Ministry, he is negligent and careless. This duality is what makes his character so complex and, in many ways, tragic. Arthur's approach to his job also raises questions about the broader cultural attitudes in the wizarding world. In a society that places great importance on maintaining order and enforcing laws, Arthur's failure to adhere to these expectations is significant. His actions suggest that there is a certain leniency when it comes to rules, particularly if they are seen as inconsequential or rooted in personal interest. The magical community, it seems, is willing to overlook minor violations if the individual in question is well-liked or well-intentioned. Number 18, Hermione's spell on Xenophilius. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, one of the most morally complex moments occurs when Hermione Granger uses magic against Xenophilius Lovegood, a man who, in his desperation, attempts to betray the trio to the Ministry in exchange for the safety of his daughter, Luna. This moment is not just a simple act of defense or survival, but one that challenges the ethical boundaries of the characters we know and love. It is a dark moment for Hermione, and one that reveals a side of her that is rarely discussed. Hermione's actions towards Xenophilius demonstrate a willingness to use magic in a manner that crosses a moral line, something she has always prided herself on avoiding. Xenophilius, a well-intentioned but ultimately misguided father, is faced with a terrifying choice. His daughter Luna has been kidnapped by Death Eaters, and he is given an ultimatum: hand over Harry, Hermione, and Ron to the Ministry, or Luna will be harmed. In a moment of intense fear and uncertainty, Xenophilius chooses to betray the trio, believing that this is the only way to protect his daughter. It is a tragic moment, one that speaks to the depth of his desperation. He is not a villain, he is a father who has lost his way. The pain and fear in his eyes are palpable, and his decision to turn on his guests is not made lightly. In response, Hermione does something that is both shocking and morally ambiguous. With a wave of her wand, she destroys Xenophilius's home. The house, once a sanctuary of oddities and eccentricities, is reduced to rubble, as if to signal the end of any further hospitality or trust. But it is not just the house that is obliterated. Hermione uses the full force of her magic to remove the threat posed by Xenophilius and to erase his memory, all in the name of protecting her friends and ensuring their safety. The sheer ruthlessness of the act is jarring, especially considering Hermione's previously established moral compass. The use of memory charm in this context is particularly striking. While memory modification is a tool used by wizards and witches to protect themselves and others, it is also a powerful, invasive form of magic. It robs a person of their autonomy, stripping them of their agency and their ability to make informed decisions. Hermione uses this magic without hesitation, casting aside any concern for the potential consequences. While it is understandable that she is acting out of a desire to protect her friends, it raises the question of whether it is ever acceptable to use such an extreme form of magic, particularly when the person being affected is a desperate father in distress. In the context of war and survival, the line between right and wrong often becomes blurred. In this case, Hermione's actions are a result of her intense desire to protect her friends and to secure the future of the wizarding world. She is a part of a resistance movement fighting against forces that would destroy everything she believes in. Yet this does not excuse the violence inherent in what she does. By using such invasive and harmful magic against Xenophilius, Hermione becomes complicit in a form of violence that she has, until this point, condemned. The very magic she once used to defend herself from bullies at school is now being used to rob a man of his identity, to erase his memories, and to destroy a part of him forever. Hermione's decision to perform such a dangerous and invasive spell also calls into question her understanding of the power she wields. She has always been portrayed as the most logical and ethical member of the trio, someone who thinks carefully before acting. Yet in this moment, she acts quickly and decisively without fully considering the long-term consequences of her actions. While she may have justified it as a necessary step to protect her friends, there is little room for remorse or reflection in her decision. Her magic is, in essence, a weapon, and like any weapon, it is capable of causing harm. This act of violence against Xenophilius stands in stark contrast to the person Hermione is when she is first introduced. As a young witch, she is shown to be deeply concerned with fairness and justice. She is a strict rule follower, the one who insists on obeying the rules of the wizarding world, even when the consequences of those rules seem unjust. She is at the beginning the moral compass of the trio, the one who keeps Ron and Harry in check. Her character development over the course of the series shows a gradual shift as she learns to challenge authority and fight for what she believes is right, even when it means breaking the rules. But here, she takes that one step further. She doesn't just break the rules, she disregards them entirely. Throughout the series, Hermione has been a firm believer in the value of using magic for good. She is the one who protests the use of dark magic, who stands up against injustice in all its forms. Her use of magic is always calculated, measured, and purposeful, but in this instance, she employs magic not to protect the innocent, but to destroy. She uses her magic to silence a man who has been pushed to the brink of madness by his love for his daughter. In a way, she becomes the very thing she has always fought against, an enforcer of power, someone who uses magic to control and manipulate others. The question arises, was Hermione justified in her actions? From a practical standpoint, the answer is likely yes. Xenophilius was a threat to their mission, and his betrayal could have had disastrous consequences for them. By using memory charms, she ensured that they could escape unscathed. From a moral perspective, however, the answer is far less clear. While Hermione's actions are understandable in the heat of the moment, they also represent a form of violence that she has rarely, if ever, condoned. Her decision to erase Xenophilius's memories, to destroy his life, is something that can be easily justified. This moment also speaks to the broader theme of the series, the moral ambiguity of war. War is not simply about good versus evil. It is about the choices we make when faced with impossible situations. In this case, Hermione's choice was to act quickly and decisively, to protect her friends and to do whatever it took to ensure their survival. But in doing so, she compromises a piece of herself, betraying her own values in the process. Hermione's actions toward Xenophilius also reflect the emotional toll that the war has taken on her. Throughout the series, we have seen her as a character who values knowledge and logic above all else. She is the one who plans, who organizes, who thinks ahead. But in this moment she is forced to react instinctively, to act without thinking, to trust her gut. And in doing so, she becomes the very thing she has always feared, a pawn in a larger, more dangerous game. In the end, Hermione's decision to use magic against Xenophilius serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times there are no easy answers. The war may have forced her to make difficult choices, but it also shows us that even the most morally upstanding characters can make mistakes. Hermione's actions are a reflection of her desperation, her fear, and her desire to protect her friends at all costs. But they also reveal the darker side of her character, the side that is willing to use magic for violence when faced with impossible choices. In this way, the series asks us to examine not just the actions of the characters, but the motivations behind those actions. We are reminded that even heroes can falter, and that the choices we make, even with the best of intentions, can have far-reaching consequences. Number 19. Percy Weasley's betrayal. Percy Weasley is one of those characters in Harry Potter whose actions, though often overlooked, deserve a closer examination, particularly when it comes to his betrayal of his family. A character who begins the series as a hard-working, slightly pompous but ultimately well-meaning individual becomes someone whose actions seem morally questionable. Percy's desire to carve out a career for himself within the Ministry of Magic leads him to distance himself from his family in a time of immense crisis. His decision to abandon his family during their most critical time of need, and worse yet, to actively support the ministry while they opposed his loved ones, marked him as a betrayer in the eyes of his kin. Yet in the narrative, this betrayal is forgiven relatively easily, and Percy eventually returns to the fold. This raises an interesting question. Why does his transgression seem to be brushed aside, and why is it that in real life such a betrayal is often remembered far longer than it is in the world of Harry Potter? Percy's actions, especially in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, highlight a moral dilemma that contrasts sharply with the heroic qualities typically associated with him. He chooses ambition over loyalty, career over family, at a time when his family needed him most. When the Second Wizarding War begins to escalate and Voldemort's return becomes undeniable, Percy remains steadfast in his loyalty to the Ministry of Magic. He believes in the system, in the bureaucracy, and in the orders of Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, who refuses to acknowledge the Dark Wizard's return. His refusal to believe his family, who are on the front lines of the resistance, betrays a deeply troubling facet of his character, his belief in authority over love. Percy's decision to separate himself from his family isn't just a matter of physical distance, but also of emotional and ideological disconnection. At the heart of Percy's betrayal lies his internal conflict. He does not simply disagree with his family, he actively criticizes and condemns them. He is dismissive of Ron's involvement in Harry Potter's cause, calling it childish and reckless, and he even goes so far as to reprimand his own mother, Molly Weasley, for not understanding the importance of the ministry's work. In this, Percy exemplifies the dangers of blind loyalty to a system, one that becomes increasingly corrupt. His arrogance, born from his ambition and self-righteous belief that he is in the right, blinds him to the reality of what's happening outside. His own narrow view of the world. Percy's decision to align with the ministry comes not just from an ideological belief, but from a deep need for validation. For Percy, his status and career were more important than any familial bond. This behavior is not simply a momentary lapse in judgment, but a prolonged period of estrangement in which Percy refuses to seek reconciliation with his family, despite knowing that they are fighting for the very same cause that he once championed. He isolates himself, pushing away the people who love him and who have supported him through every misstep in pursuit of a future that is ultimately hollow. It's easy to imagine the sense of betrayal that must have cut through Molly and Arthur Weasley when their son, whom they had raised with love and care, sided with the very forces that threatened their lives. The emotional toll of Percy's actions on his family is immense, particularly as they face increasing danger from the Death Eaters. The irony of Percy's betrayal is that it is a choice driven by his desperation to prove himself. He wants to make something of himself, to rise above the second-tier status of his large, noisy and poor family. But by turning his back on them, he misses the point entirely. His family never valued him for his career ambitions. They valued him for who he was, their son, their brother, their friend. The Weasley family never asked him to compromise his values to gain a position in the ministry. In fact, they cared more about his character and integrity than his professional success. But Percy, consumed by pride and a misguided sense of duty, does not see this. His career-driven mentality leads him to reject their love, their sacrifices, and their support. This betrayal is all the more tragic because it isn't a malicious act, it's a result of Percy's misunderstanding of what truly matters in life. What makes Percy's betrayal even more striking is that it occurs during a time when his family is under attack. Fred and George are risking their lives to run a business that provides support for the resistance. Ginny is actively involved in the fight against Voldemort, and Arthur is working at the Ministry to protect the country's security. Molly is at home, keeping the family together, while also worrying about her children's safety. Percy's indifference to these dangers, his failure to see the real consequences of his actions, marks him as someone whose personal ambition outweighs his responsibility to those who have always been there for him. His family's unwavering support for him, even when he turns his back on them, only highlights the depth of his betrayal. Yet, remarkably, the Weasleys do not cast him out, they forgive him. Percy's return to the family is, in many ways, the culmination of his personal growth. His recognition of the flaws in his judgment and his acknowledgement of the mistakes he made is an important moment for his character. It is a moment of humility in which he realizes that his career, his ambitions, and his loyalty to the Ministry were never more important than the people who loved him. It is not just a moment of reconciliation with his family, but a personal epiphany that changes him from a character who values authority above all else into someone who understands the true value of loyalty, love, and integrity. However, while Percy's redemption arc is satisfying, it is important to note that the consequences of his betrayal are not fully addressed in the books. In the real world, such a betrayal would likely have more lasting effects. Families torn apart by ideological differences often struggle to heal, and Percy's actions would likely leave scars that could not be so easily wiped away. But in the world of Harry Potter, Percy's transgression is forgiven relatively quickly. The Weasleys, though hurt by his actions, welcome him back with open arms. The book emphasizes the power of family, loyalty, and forgiveness, but it also glosses over the deeper emotional consequences of Percy's betrayal. While Percy grows and learns from his mistakes, the lasting impact of his betrayal on his family is never fully explored. This, perhaps, is the most striking aspect of his storyline, the way in which his actions are ultimately excused, even though in reality, such a betrayal would be far more difficult to forgive. In many ways, Percy's journey serves as a reflection of the values of the Weasley family, the importance of love, the power of reconciliation, and the ability to forgive even the deepest of hurts. The Weasleys show that despite Percy's betrayal, their love for him is unwavering. They understand that everyone makes mistakes, and that it is the ability to learn from those mistakes and grow that defines who we are. Percy's actions, while damaging, ultimately serve to highlight the strength of the Weasley family's unity and the depth of their unconditional love for one another. In the end, Percy's betrayal is forgiven because it is viewed through the lens of redemption. He may have turned his back on his family, but he is ultimately able to return to them, not just physically, but emotionally and ideologically. His actions are seen as a mistake, an error in judgment that can be corrected. And while it is true that his family's love for him never wavers, it is also true that his actions, though forgiven, should not be overlooked. They serve as a reminder that loyalty, love, and family are not always simple, and that betrayal, even when committed by someone good, can have profound and lasting consequences. Number 20. Dumbledore and Ariana's death. Albus Dumbledore's life is filled with numerous achievements and accolades, but beneath his towering reputation as a wise and compassionate leader lies a darker, lesser-known part of his past. One of the most haunting and tragic chapters in his history revolves around his younger sister, Ariana, whose life and death were ultimately shaped by Albus's actions. The bond between siblings should have been a source of strength for Albus, yet it became a complicated mixture of guilt, neglect, and ambition. His journey with Ariana is a grim reminder that even the most well-intentioned people are not free from moral failings, and that Dumbledore's greatness came at a steep personal cost, one he could never fully escape. Ariana Dumbledore's life was marked by violence from an early age. At the age of 6, she was attacked by 3 Muggle boys who had witnessed her performing magic without understanding it. The result of this brutal assault left Ariana physically and mentally scarred, her magic becoming erratic and uncontrollable. She could no longer channel her abilities in a healthy, productive way. Her family, especially her mother, Kendra, sought to protect her by locking her away, isolating her from the world that had so viciously attacked her. It was a decision born of fear, a desperate attempt to shield Ariana from further harm, but it also meant that Ariana's suffering was hidden away from society. As Ariana's condition worsened, it became clear that her care would fall to Albus, who was already grappling with his burgeoning ambition and academic pursuits. As the eldest son, he was responsible for his family after his father's imprisonment and mother's death in a freak accident. While Albus initially took on the role of guardian with a sense of duty, the burden of caring for Ariana quickly wore him down. He found himself increasingly frustrated with the responsibility, unable to reconcile his deep desire for greatness with the demanding and thankless role of looking after his damaged sister. Ariana's instability was not just a physical manifestation, it was also an emotional strain on the family. Albus, caught up in his intellectual pursuits and dreams of a world-changing partnership with Gellert Grindelwald, found it difficult to devote himself fully to his family, particularly to Ariana. In his pursuit of higher goals, Albus began to dream of a future that would transcend the ordinary struggles of his family's existence. He yearned for power, for change, and for a world where he could wield influence in ways that could reshape the wizarding world. Gellert Grindelwald, a brilliant and charismatic young wizard with radical ideas, appeared to be the perfect partner in this vision. The two shared an intense intellectual bond, and their shared ambition to create a new world order, one in which wizards would rule over muggles, drew them closer together. However, as Albus became more immersed in his dreams of power, Ariana's needs became secondary. Her safety, her well-being, and her care were no longer his primary concerns. The crux of Albus's tragedy lies in the choices he made during this period. His ambition to change the world with Grindelwald became an obsession that overshadowed the very real human suffering in his own home. His dreams of greatness began to take precedence over his responsibility as a brother. He was willing to sacrifice the stability of his family, including Ariana's safety, in his quest for greater power and influence. The fact that Albus was not fully present in Ariana's life, emotionally or physically, eventually led to a fatal confrontation. It was during a heated argument between Albus, his brother Aberforth, and Grindelwald that Ariana's tragic end came to pass. In a moment of intense emotion, a magical duel broke out between the 3 men. Ariana, caught in the crossfire, was struck by a curse and died. Her death, though unintended, was the result of the chain of events that Albus himself had set into motion. His actions, or rather his inactions, had led to this catastrophic moment. The tragic irony is that Albus, who had once been so intent on protecting his family and achieving greatness, found that his ambition and neglect led to the death of his beloved sister. Albus Dumbledore's guilt over Ariana's death haunted him for the rest of his life. He could never fully forgive himself for his role in her demise. The pain of her loss shaped much of his later decisions as he retreated into a life of self-imposed penance, dedicating himself to the defeat of Grindelwald and ultimately Voldemort. Dumbledore's public persona as a wise and compassionate leader masks the deep, personal tragedy that drove much of his life's work. He never openly acknowledged the full extent of his responsibility in Ariana's death, but those closest to him, particularly Harry Potter, came to understand the immense burden Albus carried. Though Dumbledore's mistakes were grave, they are often overlooked or excused in light of his later accomplishments. His great victories, his leadership in the fight against the Dark Lord, and his role as a mentor to Harry Potter have made him a figure revered by many in the wizarding world. Yet the tragedy of Ariana Dumbledore's life and death remains one of the darkest and most painful chapters in his story. The fact that Albus, a man who sought to bring about positive change in the world, failed to protect his own sister is a stark reminder that even the most noble of individuals are capable of grave mistakes. The story of Albus and Ariana Dumbledore is one of complex emotions and difficult choices. Albus was not a villain, but his ambition blinded him to the importance of family, and it ultimately cost him the life of someone he loved dearly. Ariana's death, while an accident, was the culmination of years of neglect and selfishness, traits that Albus himself later came to regret. His guilt, while never fully confessed, shaped his actions in ways that made him a better man, but it also left him forever haunted by the price of his past mistakes. In this sense, the story of Ariana Dumbledore is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition, the consequences of neglect, and the irreversible nature of some mistakes. The tragic fate of Ariana Dumbledore is a story that shows how even the most beloved and revered figures are not without their flaws. It serves as a reminder that greatness comes at a cost, and sometimes the price of success is the destruction of those closest to us. While Albus Dumbledore ultimately achieved many great things, his personal failings remain a painful and unresolved part of his legacy. The fact that he could not save his sister, the one person who had depended on him most, underscores the inherent limitations of human ambition and the consequences of prioritizing one's dreams over the needs of others. Albus Dumbledore's story is not just one of triumph, but also one of deep, personal regret. The loss of Ariana, the failure to protect her, and the toll it took on his soul are reminders that even the most powerful and revered figures in history are, at their core, human. In the end, it is not just Dumbledore's triumphs that define him, but his ability to come to terms with the mistakes he made and the lessons he learned from the tragedies in his life. Number 21. Ron abandoning Harry and Hermione. Ron Weasley, one of the most beloved characters in the Harry Potter series, is often regarded as the loyal and brave companion to Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. Over the course of the books, Ron demonstrates unwavering courage and a willingness to stand by his friends even in the face of danger. Yet in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Ron's character is put to the test in a moment that many fans are reluctant to revisit. It is during their perilous journey to find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes that Ron's decision to abandon Harry and Hermione becomes a stark reminder of the complexities that make up his character. The moment in question occurs after the trio has been on the run for months, constantly evading the Death Eaters and living under the weight of uncertainty and fear. Their quest for the Horcruxes is a daunting one, filled with danger, treachery, and the overwhelming knowledge that Voldemort's forces are growing ever stronger. Despite the constant threat to their lives, it is not the external dangers that break Ron's resolve, but the internal pressures that begin to tear him apart. This is where the influence of the Locket Horcrux comes into play. Ron, who has always struggled with feelings of inadequacy, particularly in comparison to Harry, is profoundly affected by the locket. The Horcrux amplifies his insecurities, making him feel as though he is unimportant, overshadowed by Harry's heroism and Hermione's brilliance. The constant nagging voice in his head, fueled by the locket's dark magic, convinces him that he has no place in the mission and that his contributions are not valued. This emotional turmoil builds slowly, but it reaches a breaking point when, during a particularly tense moment, Ron decides to leave Harry and Hermione in the forest. What makes Ron's decision so difficult to reconcile is not just that he runs away, but that he does so at a crucial point in their journey. Harry and Hermione are already struggling, and they need his support more than ever. His departure in that moment is not just an emotional collapse, it is a conscious choice to abandon his friends, leaving them vulnerable to whatever dangers may come. For all the good in Ron's heart, he succumbs to the same human frailties that every person can experience. And while it may be easy to excuse his actions due to the influence of the Horcrux, it is important to recognize the gravity of what he did, abandoning his friends at a critical juncture. When Ron leaves, Harry and Hermione are left to face the dangers alone. They are vulnerable in a way they haven't been before. The fact that Ron leaves them behind, even after all they have been through together, speaks to a deep inner conflict that Ron has been struggling with throughout the series. As much as he wants to be brave and courageous, as much as he wants to be the hero, Ron is also just a boy, deeply affected by the pressures around him. It is easy to forget, especially when we see him in later moments of bravery, that Ron is still a product of his own insecurities. But this moment of weakness, this desertion of his friends, is not one that is easily forgiven by those around him. It's clear from Hermione's reaction that she feels deeply hurt by Ron's actions. She, who has always relied on him for support, is now left with the burden of continuing the mission without him. It is not just about the physical danger they face, but the emotional weight of Ron's absence. The trio's bond has been tested repeatedly throughout their journey, but this act of desertion shakes it to its core, and yet despite this emotional blow, Hermione does not fully give up on him, and neither does Harry. What makes Ron's actions even more poignant is that even after abandoning them, he realizes the depth of his mistake. His return to Harry and Hermione is not just a physical one, it is a moment of personal growth for him. He understands that by leaving them, he jeopardized their mission, their lives, and their friendship. In many ways, his return is a form of redemption, but it doesn't erase the fact that he chose to leave in the first place. The consequences of his actions are not erased by his eventual heroism. Rather, they are part of the complex web of relationships and moral choices that define the series. As Ron returns to the fold, he becomes an essential part of the trio once more, helping Harry destroy the Horcrux and ultimately playing a crucial role in the defeat of Voldemort. His bravery in this moment is undeniable, and it is clear that he has overcome the weaknesses that once made him falter. But even as he redeems himself, the memory of his desertion lingers in the background, a reminder that even the most loyal and courageous characters can struggle with their own weaknesses. In some ways, Ron's actions reflect the broader themes of the series. The Harry Potter books are filled with characters who are flawed, who make mistakes, and who must grapple with the consequences of their actions. It is this complexity that makes the characters so relatable and real. Ron's desertion, painful as it may be, is a part of his character arc, one that shows his growth and development as a person. It is not the heroic deeds that define him, but his ability to face his mistakes, make amends, and continue fighting alongside his friends. For many fans, however, this moment is one that is often overlooked or glossed over. Perhaps it is because Ron's return and ultimate heroism are so powerful that the earlier betrayal is pushed to the background. It is easier to remember Ron's courageous return than to dwell on the fact that for a brief moment he was the one who left. And yet this moment of weakness is what makes his return all the more meaningful. It is a testament to the strength of his character that despite his earlier desertion, he finds the courage to come back and do what is right. The fact that Ron's abandonment is often ignored in fan discussions is a reflection of how we tend to favor the redemptive arc over the moments of failure. Ron, like many of the characters in the series, is often seen as the comic relief, the sidekick to Harry's heroism. But his desertion and subsequent return show that even the most loyal friends can falter, and that true bravery lies in owning up to one's mistakes and learning from them. In many ways, Ron's journey is one of growth, not just as a fighter or a friend, but as a person. It's also important to consider the role of the Horcrux in this moment. While it is easy to blame Ron for his desertion, it is essential to recognize the profound psychological impact that the cursed locket has on him. The Horcrux amplifies his deepest fears and insecurities, and in that moment, he is overwhelmed by them. Ron's abandonment is not just a sign of weakness, it is also a reflection of how easily even the strongest of characters can be influenced by dark magic. This complexity makes his character all the more human and relatable, reminding us that everyone, no matter how brave or noble, is vulnerable to their own doubts and fears. Ultimately, Ron's moment of failure and his subsequent redemption is a powerful reminder that even the best of friends can make mistakes, but it is how they confront and learn from those mistakes that defines their true character. It is through this journey that Ron Weasley becomes one of the most complex and beloved characters in the Harry Potter series, not because he is perfect, but because he is real. And it is this humanity, this ability to fall and rise again, that resonates with readers and viewers alike. Number 22. Harry using the Imperious Curse. In the final battle against Voldemort and his forces, Harry Potter, the hero who had spent his entire life fighting for justice, faced a dilemma that would leave a dark stain on his moral compass. This was the moment when he used the Imperious Curse, one of the unforgivable curses, a spell so dark it could control a person's mind, turning them into nothing more than a puppet. This curse was infamous for its ability to strip away free will, forcing its victims to carry out the caster's bidding, regardless of their own desires or moral leanings. Harry, the boy who had always prided himself on fighting for the greater good, was now using the very dark magic that he had once sworn to destroy. The reason? A noble one. To gain access to the vaults of Bellatrix Lestrange, one of Voldemort's most loyal followers, in the heart of Gringotts Bank. Harry's decision to cast the Imperious Curse on a helpless goblin, Griphook, during the heist at Gringotts is one of the most morally ambiguous actions in the entire series. At the time, Harry was desperate. He knew that to defeat Voldemort he needed to find and destroy the Horcruxes, pieces of Voldemort's soul hidden in objects across the wizarding world. The Horcruxes were the key to Voldemort's immortality, and unless they were destroyed, he would never truly be defeated. But the task before him was not an easy one. Gringotts was known for its impenetrable security, and only a select few were able to navigate the labyrinth of vaults and dangers to retrieve what they sought. With time running out, and the stakes higher than ever, Harry chose to use the Imperious Curse on Griphook. The Imperious Curse was not a casual spell. It was one of the 3 unforgivable curses alongside the Cruciatus Curse and the Killing Curse. These curses were forbidden in the wizarding world because they were seen as violations of personal autonomy and human rights. The use of such magic, even for the noblest of reasons, was considered a dangerous path to walk. But in that moment, Harry was willing to risk it all. The purpose of his action, to retrieve a Horcrux that could potentially save countless lives, seemed justifiable. After all, he was trying to stop a dark wizard from gaining absolute power over the magical world. Yet it was this very act that made people question whether Harry had truly crossed a line. When Harry used the Imperious Curse on Griphook, he was fully aware of the power he wielded. He knew that by casting it he was taking away the goblin's free will, reducing him to nothing more than a tool for his mission. And while Harry's intention was to protect the world from Voldemort's tyranny, the question remained, did the ends justify the means? The moment Harry used the curse, he was no longer acting as the idealistic hero we had come to admire. Instead, he was participating in the very magic he had spent his entire life fighting against. There was something deeply unsettling about the way Harry justified his actions. He knew that he was violating the rights of another, but the severity of the situation clouded his judgment. It was as if the gravity of the task at hand, the need to destroy Voldemort once and for all, gave him a pass to cross moral boundaries that he once considered sacred. What makes this even more disturbing is the fact that Harry didn't hesitate. Throughout the series, Harry had been portrayed as someone who would never stray too far from his principles. Even when tempted by the allure of dark magic, he had managed to stay true to himself. But in that critical moment, he didn't stop to consider the potential consequences of his actions. There was no inner debate, no moral dilemma. He simply cast the imperious curse, and that was it. In the eyes of some, this action marked the moment where Harry's character, once a symbol of pure righteousness, became tainted by the same darkness he had fought against for so long. The imperious curse, after all, wasn't just any dark spell. It was an emblem of control and manipulation. For Harry to use it was to take on the role of the very tyrant he despised. This wasn't a small lapse in judgment. This was an act of domination, a choice to manipulate someone else's will for the sake of his mission. And while it could be argued that Harry had no other choice, that the situation was dire and that he had to act quickly, the truth remained that the act of using the imperious curse was a deliberate one. There's a particular moment in the book where Harry's actions are called into question. After Griphook is placed under the imperious curse, Harry feels a fleeting sense of unease. He feels guilty, perhaps even ashamed, but the urgency of their mission overtakes that guilt. He needs to retrieve the Horcrux, and Griphook is the key to their success. Yet, even though Harry knows what he's done, he doesn't seem to dwell on it for long. It's as though he compartmentalizes the act, pushing it to the back of his mind because it serves the greater good. But does that truly make it acceptable? Harry's decision raises a much larger question about the nature of good and evil in the wizarding world. How far can a hero go before they become the very thing they are fighting against? It's a question that the series touches on repeatedly, but never quite answers definitively. Harry, throughout the books, is presented as a morally upstanding character, someone who always strives to do the right thing. But the moment he uses the imperious curse, he is no longer that clear-cut hero. He becomes a more complex figure, someone who is willing to blur the lines between good and evil for the sake of a greater cause. And it's this ambiguity that makes Harry's character so compelling and so troubling. As readers, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that even the most virtuous of characters can slip. Harry's use of the imperious curse is a reminder that no one is beyond reproach. Even the best intentions can lead to dark choices. And while Harry ultimately succeeds in his mission, the cost of his actions remains uncertain. What is the true price of defeating evil? Is it worth sacrificing one's own moral integrity in the process? What makes this all the more poignant is the fact that Harry is not the only character who grapples with this moral dilemma. Throughout the series, we see other characters, such as Snape and Dumbledore, wrestle with similar questions. Snape, for example, is often seen as an anti-hero, someone who walks the fine line between good and evil. Dumbledore, too, is revealed to have made decisions in his youth that would later come back to haunt him. The theme of moral ambiguity runs deep in the series, reminding readers that even the most revered figures can falter. And Harry's use of the Imperious Curse is just one example of this complex moral terrain. In the end, Harry's use of the Imperious Curse remains one of the most thought-provoking moments in the series. It challenges our perceptions of him as a hero and forces us to question the very nature of heroism itself. Is a hero still a hero if they use dark magic for a good cause? Where do we draw the line between right and wrong when the stakes are this high? And can the ends ever truly justify the means? These are the questions that Harry's actions leave us to ponder, long after we have turned the final page. Number 23, Bill Weasley's absence as a father. Bill Weasley, the oldest son of the Weasley family, has long been seen as a symbol of responsibility and heroism. As a key member of the Order of the Phoenix, Bill's participation in the Battle of Hogwarts marked him as a true warrior, someone who stood for what was good and just. He was also celebrated for his marriage to Fleur Delacour, a union that seemed to represent stability and love amidst the chaos of the Wizarding World's war. However, despite the public admiration for Bill as a brother, a soldier, and a husband, there is a glaring absence in his character arc that cannot be ignored: his failure to demonstrate any significant paternal presence after becoming a father. In the epilogue of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where we are introduced to his daughter Victoria, a curious absence is felt. Bill Weasley, the father, is nowhere to be seen in the emotional scene on platform 934. At first glance, this absence could be dismissed as a simple omission. However, when examined more closely, it becomes clear that Bill's neglect of his role as a father is not a mere oversight by J.K. Rowling, but rather an overlooked flaw in an otherwise heroic character. Bill's behavior can be seen as an unsettling example of the way the wizarding world, much like the real world, tends to gloss over certain flaws of their heroes in favor of idealized versions of them. After all, Bill is everything we expect a good son, soldier, and brother to be: brave, steadfast, loyal, and just. But as a father, he becomes an almost invisible figure. This failure to highlight Bill's responsibilities as a father is particularly striking given the importance of family in the Harry Potter series. The Weasley family has always been a symbol of what it means to be a loving and supportive family unit. Arthur and Molly Weasley are the epitome of selfless parenting, offering warmth, understanding, and a deep commitment to their children. They provide an idealized family structure, one in which every child is nurtured and cared for, and the emotional well-being of the family is paramount. However, Bill's silence in the final moments of the story suggests a profound disconnection from this ideal. In the epilogue, we are introduced to Bill and Fleur's daughter, Victoria. While the scene focuses primarily on Harry Potter's children, Victoria's presence and her unspoken connection to her father raises more questions than it answers. Bill's role as a father is essentially ignored. Despite the joyous occasion of sending their children off to Hogwarts, Bill's absence is a glaring omission. It is as though his relationship with Victoria is deemed unimportant or perhaps too complicated to address within the confines of the narrative. But why? This absence of a father figure is not only puzzling, but it also reflects a larger issue within the narrative framework of the Harry Potter series. Bill Weasley, though an admirable character in many respects, fails in a crucial role when it comes to the responsibilities of fatherhood. His position as a loving husband to Fleur, while important, is contrasted by his almost complete disappearance from the fatherly responsibilities he should embrace. At no point does Bill take center stage in his child's life, and the absence of any mention of him in key family moments throughout the story reveals how easily fatherhood is relegated in the Weasley family dynamic, even for a character as otherwise heroic as Bill. Moreover, Bill's role in the battle for Hogwarts should have been contrasted with his familial obligations. Bill is an integral part of the final stand against Voldemort's forces, and as a warrior, his valor is unquestionable. He is a member of the Order of the Phoenix, having fought bravely during the battle in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and continues his commitment to the cause of defeating the Dark Lord. Yet when the battle is over and the dust settles, there is no indication of Bill's transition into the new phase of life as a parent. While many of the other characters grapple with the aftermath of war and find solace in their families, Bill seems to have retreated from active participation in his child's life. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are all seen evolving in their respective roles as parents in the epilogue. Each of them, despite the burdens they carried during the war, actively embraces their roles as parents, guiding their children with love and care. Ron and Hermione are shown taking their children to Platform 934, engaged in the parent-child dynamic. Harry, in particular, is present and attentive with his children. But Bill is conspicuously absent. This absence can be interpreted as more than just a plot device. It may reflect an uncomfortable truth about the ease with which the expectations of fatherhood can be overlooked when a character, like Bill, is seen primarily as a hero on the battlefield. The fact that J.K. Rowling chose not to explore Bill's role as a father after the war speaks volumes. Fatherhood, it seems, is often relegated to the background for characters who are primarily defined by their wartime heroism. Bill's life after the war is a mystery. The final image of him, a warrior and a husband, fails to show us how he reconciled these roles with his duty as a father. Even Bill's relationship with Fleur is not fully explored in terms of their parental roles. In the books, their marriage is presented as a symbol of love and unity. They seem to support one another, and Bill's decision to marry Fleur after the war signals a new chapter in both of their lives. But while Fleur is portrayed as a strong and determined woman, standing by her husband through thick and thin, Bill is less defined in his role as a supportive partner in the raising of their child. Unlike other couples in the series, such as Harry and Ginny, whose relationship is shown to grow and evolve in response to their children, Bill and Fleur's marriage seems to be defined solely by their romantic bond, not their partnership in parenting. This lack of attention to Bill's role as a father may not be a reflection of J.K. Rowling's view on parenthood, but rather an unintended consequence of her narrative choices. After all, she has consistently championed the importance of family throughout the series, emphasizing how crucial it is for children to have loving and involved parents. However, in the case of Bill Weasley, the responsibility of fatherhood is left largely unexplored, and his presence in his child's life is scarcely mentioned. This oversight may seem like an inconsequential detail, but it serves as a subtle commentary on the ways in which certain roles, even those that are just as vital as heroism, can be minimized or ignored. In conclusion, Bill Weasley's failure to fully embrace his paternal role stands as a stark contrast to the otherwise idealized image of the Weasley family. While he is a symbol of bravery, loyalty, and love, his absence in his child's life, especially in the epilogue, raises questions about how the world of Harry Potter views fatherhood and the responsibilities that come with it. Bill's story, like many of the characters in the series, is one of growth and change. But in his case, that growth seems to stop short when it comes to his duties as a father, leaving behind a sense of unfulfilled potential and a father's absence that echoes through the narrative. Number 24. Tonks and her reckless love. Nymphadora. Tonks was a vibrant and lively character, one whose presence could light up the darkest corners of the wizarding world. A metamorph magus by birth, she had the unique ability to change her appearance at will, which symbolized the adaptability and strength of her character. She was someone who faced the difficulties of life with a smile and an innate sense of joy, even in the most perilous times. Tonks was undoubtedly a good person, loyal to her friends and unwavering in her support of the Order of the Phoenix. Yet despite her positive traits, her actions particularly when it came to her relationship with Remus Lupin, raised questions about her judgment and the consequences of her decisions. Her determination to marry him even when he repeatedly rejected her due to his lycanthropy and financial situation led to their ultimate tragic end. While love is a powerful and transformative force, her relentless pursuit of this love, disregarding the practicalities and dangers of their situation, serves as an example of how even the most well-meaning characters can sometimes act recklessly, ignoring the potential consequences of their decisions. Tonks' infatuation with Lupin is one of the more poignant and complicated aspects of her character. Lupin, a former Hogwarts professor and a werewolf, was someone who lived a life marked by isolation and self-doubt. He was deeply aware of the prejudices he faced because of his condition, and this made him feel unworthy of love. He didn't believe he deserved a family, especially someone as vibrant and full of life as Tonks. His reluctance was rooted in his own fears of endangering her, of being unable to give her the life she deserved. Yet Tonks, determined to defy these fears, refused to let him push her away. She saw the goodness in him, the courage and the selflessness that he often failed to recognize in himself. Her love for him was deep and unwavering, but her insistence on pushing him into a relationship, despite his reservations, showed a lack of regard for the complexity of their situation. She wanted what she thought was best for both of them, but she failed to see the larger picture, the consequences of being involved with someone who was constantly in danger, especially during a war. Their relationship was set against the backdrop of the Second Wizarding War, a time of great peril and uncertainty. Lupin's fear of what his condition could mean for those around him was not unfounded. As a werewolf, he could not guarantee his safety, let alone the safety of those he loved. And yet Tonks, driven by her affection for him, insisted on marrying him. Her desire to be with him seemed to blind her to the risks involved. In a world where every day could be one's last, she chose to embrace a future that was fraught with danger and uncertainty. It was a reckless decision, one that had far-reaching consequences. They did not just risk their own lives, they risked the life of their unborn child. The decision to have a child during the war, while understandable in its expression of love, was also deeply irresponsible. War was an unforgiving time, filled with loss and destruction. In choosing to bring a child into such a volatile world, Tonks and Lupin were not only endangering their own futures, but also the future of the child they would eventually raise. The baby, who would later be named Teddy, was born into a world where both of his parents would be dead before he had the chance to know them. The tragic irony was that the love they shared, so fierce and unyielding, ultimately led to their untimely deaths, leaving their child to grow up as an orphan. Was this what they had wanted for him? Certainly not. But in their pursuit of love, they had failed to consider the practicalities, the long-term consequences of their actions. In the end, their child was left without parents, a casualty of their impulsive decisions. Tonks' relentless pursuit of love, her refusal to listen to reason or to see the bigger picture, led to her undoing. She chose love over caution, passion over practicality. She acted impulsively, driven by a desire to be with someone she loved, even when that meant ignoring the warnings of those around her. Lupin's hesitation, his warnings about the dangers of their relationship, were clear. He knew the risks, and yet Tonks persisted. She believed that love was enough to overcome any obstacle, even the harsh realities of the world they lived in. But love alone is not always enough to protect people from the consequences of their actions. Love does not make one invincible. In the world of Harry Potter, as in life, good intentions can often lead to tragic outcomes, and Tonks's story is a testament to that fact. Her love for Lupin, though genuine, was not without its faults. In her determination to be with him, she ignored his wishes, his boundaries. She did not respect his need for space or his fear of hurting her. Instead, she pushed him almost to the point of breaking, and in doing so she failed to acknowledge his own emotional turmoil. Lupin had spent his entire life feeling like an outsider, unworthy of love, and Tonks' insistence on being with him, despite his protests, only added to his inner conflict. While she was undoubtedly a loving and caring partner, her actions showed a lack of respect for Lupin's struggles and fears. She did not take the time to truly understand the depth of his emotional scars, and in her eagerness to make their relationship work, she overlooked the complexity of Lupin's condition and the toll it took on him. Tonks's actions were not the result of malice or selfishness. She was, by all accounts, a good person, but her decisions were, at times, reckless and impulsive. In her pursuit of happiness, she failed to consider the long-term implications of her actions. She chose love over caution, and in doing so she placed herself and her family in danger. Her story serves as a reminder that even the most well-meaning individuals can make decisions that have unintended consequences. Love, while powerful, is not always enough to overcome the challenges of life, especially in a world as dangerous as the one Tonks inhabited. Tonks's tragic end, along with that of Lupin, was a result of her inability to recognize the consequences of her actions. Her decision to marry him and have a child in the middle of a war was reckless, even if motivated by love. Their deaths left a hole in the lives of those who cared for them, particularly their son Teddy, who would grow up without his parents. It was a heartbreaking outcome, one that could have been avoided had Tonks and Lupin taken a step back and considered the risks more carefully. Their love, while beautiful, ultimately led to a loss that could have been prevented. In the end, Tonks's story is one of love, loss, and the consequences of unchecked passion. It's a reminder that even the most heroic characters are not immune to making mistakes, and that love, while noble, is not always a cure for the harsh realities of life. Her actions, though born from the best of intentions, were flawed in their execution, and the tragic consequences serve as a cautionary tale for all who are driven by emotion without considering the broader picture. Number 25. Abraxas Malfoy, the Forgotten Elitist. Abraxas Malfoy is a name that in the wizarding world of Harry Potter is barely whispered and only mentioned in passing. Yet his influence and actions had a significant impact on the Malfoy family and the broader magical society. Abraxas was the father of Lucius Malfoy, a prominent character in the series, and his legacy looms large, though it's often overlooked. Abraxas was a man of considerable standing, both socially and politically, respected by many within the wizarding elite, but his reputation is far from pristine. What makes his story even more intriguing is the fact that he is a character whose misdeeds and questionable beliefs have largely been erased from the narrative, as if society is determined to close its eyes to his wrongdoings and hold on to his status as a respectable aristocrat. Abraxas. Malfoy's influence stretched far beyond his family. He was not only a well-connected figure among the pureblood families, but he also held a position of authority within the Ministry of Magic. He was an advisor, an insider, someone who shaped policy and helped steer the direction of wizarding society. He was a man who lobbied fiercely for the protection of pureblood interests, something that would later become central to the rise of Voldemort and his Death Eaters. While Abraxas himself was not officially a Death Eater, his alignment with Voldemort's ideals was clear, and his views on blood purity were not only public, but also influential. He was one of those people who believed that the old families were the rightful rulers of the magical world, and that Muggle-borns like Hermione Granger had no place among them. Yet despite these connections and beliefs, Abraxas Malfoy managed to escape the full weight of scrutiny and reproach that many others in the wizarding world would face. He was never formally charged or branded as a Death Eater. Instead, he continued to move within the circles of power, maintaining his social standing and wealth. His views on pureblood superiority, his ties to Voldemort's ideology, and his influence over the Ministry all seemed to be quietly forgiven by the wider society. Perhaps his wealth and his status as a representative of the old guard allowed him to remain untouchable, but his actions were far from virtuous. One of the most significant and troubling aspects of Abraxas's legacy is his role in shaping his son, Lucius. Lucius Malfoy, as a young man, followed in his father's footsteps, eagerly adopting the same beliefs about blood purity and pure-blood supremacy. Lucius's open support for Voldemort's cause, along with his active participation in the Death Eaters, can be traced back to the lessons his father imparted upon him. The family's wealth, power, and influence were built on the same foundation of elitism and prejudice that Abraxas promoted, and it's clear that he was grooming his son to uphold these same values. Lucius, however, is not the only one who bears responsibility for these beliefs. Abraxas, through his position, his wealth, and his influence, played a pivotal role in shaping the ideologies that would later infect the wizarding world. While many members of the wizarding elite were content to live in the shadows, merely paying lip service to the idea of pureblood superiority, Abraxas actively sought to advance it. His wealth, his influence, and his connections made him a key player in the wizarding world. But his ideological stance was more insidious. The Malfoy family, under Abraxas's guidance, became one of the leading families promoting the idea of pureblood dominance, even if it was not yet fully articulated in the form of Voldemort's dark mark. He represented the kind of respectability that many in wizarding society aspired to, a respectable, wealthy, and influential family with a long history of magical prowess. But beneath that surface was a deeply troubling ideology. Abraxas's relationship with the Ministry of Magic also adds to his complex legacy. As an advisor, he wielded considerable influence over policy decisions that affected the wizarding world. He was a man who knew how to navigate the corridors of power, and he used that skill to advance the interests of the pure-blood families, often at the expense of Muggle-borns and those considered to be lesser in the magical community. His power within the Ministry helped to protect the Malfoy family and their interests, even as the wizarding world began to fracture along lines of blood purity. The fact that Abraxas was able to remain untouched by any major consequences despite his close association with Voldemort's ideology is a testament to his ability to conceal his true beliefs behind a facade of respectability. Despite his ideological alignment with Voldemort's ideals, Abraxas Malfoy was not fully committed to the Death Eaters' cause. He was not willing to join the ranks of Voldemort's followers, likely because of the risk involved and the desire to protect his family and wealth. He was a man who sought power, but he was not necessarily willing to sacrifice everything to achieve it. His influence in the wizarding world, however, was still undeniable. He understood the value of loyalty and how to manipulate the political system to his advantage. While his actions were not as overtly violent or destructive as those of Voldemort or his followers, they laid the groundwork for the rise of the Dark Lord and his reign of terror. The case of Abraxas Malfoy is a stark reminder of the dangers of closed eyes and selective memory in society. He was a man whose views and actions should have been condemned, yet he was allowed to move freely through the circles of power, unchallenged and largely unquestioned. His actions were a precursor to the rise of Voldemort, and his influence helped to perpetuate the culture of blood purity that ultimately led to the wizarding world's most dangerous and destructive period. The fact that Abraxas's actions were largely forgotten or excused speaks volumes about the way that society is often willing to overlook the flaws of those who hold power, wealth, or influence. Abraxas, Malfoy's role in the wizarding world, is an uncomfortable one, yet it is one that cannot be ignored. He may not have been an active member of Voldemort's inner circle, but he was undeniably complicit in the ideologies that led to the Dark Lord's rise. His actions and those of his family helped to create a climate in which blood purity was valued above all else, and those who did not meet these standards were deemed inferior. In a sense, Abraxas represents the type of respectable evil that is often overlooked by society, a man who quietly pushed his agenda forward while hiding behind the veil of wealth, power, and respectability. What makes Abraxas's story even more poignant is the legacy he left behind for his son, Lucius. Lucius's own participation in the Death Eaters and his unwavering support for Voldemort's cause can be traced directly back to the lessons he learned from his father. It is clear that Abraxas's influence on Lucius was profound and long-lasting, shaping not only his beliefs but also his actions. In a way, Abraxas's failure to publicly confront the dangers of Voldemort's ideology led to the continuation of that dangerous legacy through his son. This makes Abraxas Malfoy a key figure in the history of the Dark Lord's rise to power, one whose actions were both instrumental and, in many ways, invisible. Abraxas Malfoy's story is one that challenges the idea of heroism and virtue in the wizarding world. While many characters are seen as either good or bad, Abraxas represents a more complex and troubling figure. He is a man whose beliefs and actions had far-reaching consequences, even if those consequences were not immediately visible. His legacy serves as a reminder that the line between good and evil is often blurred, and that even those who are respected and admired can be complicit in harmful ideologies. Number 26, Flitwick's passivity during crisis. Professor Filius Flitwick was widely respected at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, known for his kindness, wisdom, and powerful magical prowess. As the Charms Professor and head of Ravenclaw House, he was a beloved figure who carried the mantle of both educator and a protector of the school. His small stature and gentle demeanor, however, concealed a fierce duelist who had once fought in various magical battles and held a reputation that could easily make him a formidable ally in times of crisis. Yet in the many turbulent years leading up to and during the Second Wizarding War, one striking question arose. Where was Professor Flitwick when the students and the school were in desperate need of his intervention? In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when the battle between the Order and the Death Eaters was becoming ever more brutal, Flitwick seemed to vanish from the key moments of action. The book recounts how Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger and other students were subjected to threats and even physical violence. A critical moment arrived when Harry, Ron and Hermione were relentlessly tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange in the Department of Mysteries. Throughout this harrowing time, the usual protection that students could rely on from their teachers was curiously absent. While the Order of the Phoenix fought valiantly outside the battle, Filius Flitwick remained an observer. His absence from any direct confrontation with the Death Eaters or in providing aid to the students during such an intense crisis was stark. It was as though his presence as a magical expert, one who could easily tip the balance of any fight with his charms, was rendered invisible. Even more puzzling was Flitwick's lack of vocal support for Harry when the Ministry of Magic set out to destroy the boy's reputation. During the campaign against Harry's claims about Lord Voldemort's return, the young wizard found himself publicly humiliated. His name was dragged through the mud, his bravery called into question, and his warnings dismissed as the ramblings of a madman. The Ministry, with its propaganda machines in full gear, branded Harry as a liar, and yet the faculty at Hogwarts, including Professor Flitwick, remained silent. Why did he not speak out? Why did he not use his influence to protect the truth, or at the very least offer moral support to Harry when the situation was at its most dire? As a wizard of great standing, Flitwick had the power and stature to resist the Ministry's oppressive tactics, but he remained passive, almost as if his role was to silently watch as the storm raged. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Flitwick finally stepped up to defend his students. His charm skills were invaluable in helping protect the school, and his contribution was undeniably important. Yet even here, his involvement was tempered by the fact that his actions seemed too little, too. Where had he been during the many years leading up to this final confrontation? Was there not a single moment where he could have used his powerful charms and status to directly resist the growing forces of darkness? His silence during the Ministry's propaganda campaign, his reluctance to take a stand when the students were being attacked or ostracized, suggested a passivity that was difficult to reconcile with the role of a teacher at such a crucial time. Flitwick was not alone in his quiet approach to the war. There were others like Professor McGonagall and even Hagrid, who were more vocal in their resistance and who took an active role in standing up for the students and against the rise of Voldemort's influence. However, Flitwick's inaction stood in sharp contrast to the more vocal and confrontational members of Hogwarts faculty. As head of Ravenclaw, a house known for its sharp intellect and independence, one might have expected him to take a more active role in defending his students, or at least taking a public stand against the Ministry's tyranny. But instead, he was conspicuously absent during some of the most important moments in the story. When Harry and his friends faced danger, Flitwick's role was often more observational. He did not lead the charge, nor did he offer the students any clear public direction when the school was under siege. This was evident in the many moments of danger faced by the students, particularly during the events of the Half-Blood Prince and the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort's followers infiltrated Hogwarts and began to terrorize the school. While the teachers were essential in defending the school, Flitwick remained reserved, and his intervention was often peripheral at best. His actions were minimal compared to the direct leadership shown by Professors McGonagall or even Snape, who, despite his complicated and ambiguous role, still played a more visible role in the defense of the students. The fact that Flitwick remained so passive, particularly when the lives of students were at risk, raises a crucial question. Was it his nature to step back, relying on others to take the lead? Perhaps his actions or lack thereof can be understood as part of his deep belief in the inherent goodness of his students and a wish to let them shape their own destinies. Flitwick had been a part of many battles in his earlier days as a duelist, but now, as a teacher, perhaps he saw his role as one of guiding and advising rather than fighting. He may have believed that the students, especially Harry, needed to take the forefront and lead their own rebellion against the forces of evil. But even in this, Flitwick's passive approach becomes problematic. Was he truly being wise by stepping back, or was he avoiding the very responsibilities that his powerful position at Hogwarts demanded? In many ways, Flitwick represents the complexities of the passive character in Harry Potter. He is an undoubtedly good man, one with the heart of a true Gryffindor when it comes to his students, but his reluctance to step into the role of a leader when it was most needed paints him in a different light. The fact that he was a former duelist, one who had once fought on the front lines, only adds to the questions surrounding his behavior. Why, then, did he choose to stay on the sidelines when his help could have changed the course of many events? While it is easy to forgive characters like Flitwick because of his gentleness and his tendency to avoid conflict, his actions, or lack thereof, during critical moments cannot be ignored. The very students he protected and cared for needed him at the most crucial times. Flitwick's passive stance in the face of danger raises an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes even the best and most revered characters are guilty of inaction when the stakes are the highest. His decision to remain a mere observer rather than actively engage in the fight against the forces of evil serves as a reminder that even good people, with all their talents and wisdom, can fall short of what is needed when the world is on the brink of chaos. His passivity, while understandable in some respects, leaves a lingering question in the hearts of those who were waiting for him to stand up and lead when the time was most crucial. Number 27. Dumbledore's Army and Unsafe Training. The creation of Dumbledore's army was one of the most pivotal moments in the Harry Potter series, marking a turning point in Harry, Hermione, and Ron's journey. Their decision to form a secret student-led group for the purpose of training against the forces of darkness was undeniably brave and, to some extent, heroic. However, in retrospect, one could argue that it was also a reckless and dangerous choice. The army was founded with good intentions, but the lack of adult supervision, the secretive nature of its meetings, and the high-risk nature of the magic they practiced reveal a darker side to the heroism displayed by these young students. In their third year at Hogwarts, the trio had learned that the wizarding world was not the simple place they once thought it was. The rise of Lord Voldemort was no longer something whispered about in fear. It was an undeniable fact. Yet the wizarding community was still hesitant to acknowledge the threat, and the Ministry of Magic was more focused on denying Voldemort's return than on preparing for the horrors to come. It was in this climate that Harry, Hermione, and Ron took matters into their own hands and decided to form a group of students who could defend themselves. While this was admirable, it's clear that the circumstances under which they carried out their plan were far from ideal. The army began in the most clandestine of manners. Harry, Hermione, and Ron met secretly in the Room of Requirement, a hidden chamber in Hogwarts that was practically unknown to anyone except those with a clear need. They gathered a group of students from different years, all of whom were eager to learn magic that could defend them against the dark forces that were clearly taking hold of the world. It was meant to be an informal and safe way to practice, but the lack of adult guidance should not be overlooked. These were children still in their teens, working with some of the most dangerous spells in the wizarding world. The group's goal was simple: to equip themselves with the skills necessary to protect themselves from Death Eaters, yet the potential for disaster was enormous. The spells they practiced were not the harmless charms they learned in their classes. They were battle spells, offensive and defensive magic that had the power to kill, maim, or severely injure. It was not as though they were practicing in a controlled environment with a knowledgeable teacher at the helm. The magic they were learning was far from foolproof, and even the most experienced witches and wizards could make mistakes with these powerful incantations. For these students, the consequences could be fatal. Take, for example, the case of Harry himself. Despite his talent and innate connection to magic, he was still very young, and there were times when his own recklessness and impulsiveness put others at risk. During one of the meetings, he instructed the group to practice the stunning spell, a standard spell in any duel. However, in their enthusiasm, a misfire led to a disastrous situation where a student was injured. While the injury wasn't life-threatening, it served as a wake-up call that not everything Harry and his friends were doing was as safe as they had imagined. Hermione Granger, the most responsible of the trio, may have known better than to involve herself in such high-risk training without adult supervision, but her deep desire to help fight the growing darkness led her to push forward with the plan. Hermione, for all her intellect, lacked the years of experience needed to anticipate all the possible dangers of such a situation. She believed in the righteousness of their cause, but even she had to admit that the stakes were incredibly high. She once voiced her concerns about the risks, particularly after the injury, but was quickly swept up in the excitement of the cause, just as her friends were. It was easy to convince themselves that this was the right thing to do. After all, they were trying to make a difference. Ron Weasley, for his part, was always a bit more cautious. While he didn't have the natural talent Harry did or the intellectual rigor of Hermione, he possessed an awareness of the consequences that sometimes made him hesitant to go along with their plans. Yet, in the end, he too threw himself into the training, feeling the pressure of being part of something important. As much as he trusted his friends and believed in their mission, he wasn't blind to the fact that what they were doing was dangerous. But Ron's loyalty, combined with the thrill of rebellion and the promise of action, ultimately overpowered his reservations. He too found himself in a situation where he was practicing potentially deadly spells with little more than the knowledge that they were doing it to fight a good cause. The responsibility for the students' safety, of course, didn't rest solely on their shoulders. Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts and a guiding figure for the trio, knew that the students were practicing dangerous magic in secret. He was not unaware of the army's existence, and while he did not outright condone their actions, he also did not actively stop them. In some ways, Dumbledore's indifference to the situation was perhaps the most troubling part of the whole ordeal. He had the power to intervene, to end the secret meetings before anything truly disastrous could occur. Yet he allowed it to continue, reasoning that the students were preparing themselves for a battle that the adults were too reluctant to face. The question arises, was Dumbledore truly turning a blind eye, or was he, in his own way, allowing the children to take on a responsibility that he himself could not bear? The answer is left to the interpretation of the reader, but the fact remains that Dumbledore allowed the situation to unfold without stepping in to halt the risk. The idea that good intentions do not always equate to doing the right thing is a central theme in this scenario. While the army was formed out of a desperate need for action, the lack of proper guidance, oversight, and safety measures meant that their efforts were fraught with peril. What happens when students who are still learning magic are placed in a high-stakes environment where the risks are far too great for them to fully comprehend? What happens when they are encouraged to experiment with magic that could cause real harm without the support of a responsible adult figure? Of course, one could argue that the actions of Harry, Hermione, and Ron were necessary. The fight against Voldemort and his followers was not one that could be postponed until the adults decided to act. They had seen firsthand how dangerous the world had become, and they could not simply sit back and wait for someone else to take action. Their training was a form of self-preservation and an attempt to protect their friends and families. It was an act of defiance, of resistance. But does that justify the recklessness involved? Was it acceptable for them to take such risks, or should they have waited for more experienced wizards to guide them? Ultimately, the consequences of their actions were not as catastrophic as they could have been. The war came, and the students who had participated in Dumbledore's army proved to be invaluable allies in the fight against Voldemort. They had learned how to defend themselves, how to fight back against the darkness. Yet it's important to reflect on the fact that had one of them been seriously injured, the blame would have been shared among them, Dumbledore, and the system that allowed them to train in such an unregulated environment. In the end, Dumbledore's army was a symbol of resistance, courage, and hope. It was a rallying cry for those who were not willing to wait for the grown-ups to take charge. But it was also a reminder that doing good doesn't always mean doing it the right way. Sometimes, in the quest for justice and safety, we overlook the risks and the consequences of our actions. In the case of Dumbledore's army, the risks were huge, and the consequences of failure could have been disastrous. But in the end, the army was successful, and the world would never be the same again.